235. So numbers transposed. Do you want to pull that one out?
Yep.
Thank you.
Only got a 56 cent big check.
Spend it all in one place.
Had some very positive comments about the rebate checks. It's fun to hear. People not expecting a little something, something.
Yep.
Check.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you can, keep the rebate claims separate from the other claims.
I should start on
We pick a lucky customer for every week that doesn't have a finite time.
I guess so. Brittany thought it was because I couldn't be trusted. The look on your face when you go over and stuff, that everything's going into one pile is priceless, so thank you.
Thank you.
So I can't explain.
Give them one to me at 2%. It's usually my favorite value.
Sorry, that form. Just randomly mix this in with your file.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Can I fold them in?
I would hope so.
At risk of not getting an invite next year, though.
Justified.
This is a good one, we got rid of all the fish. First time
Nice.
ever, yeah.
So now you've got a job to do. I
Yeah.
don't know.
We counted 85 people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, then I certainly wasn't missed. Had a week-long deal down in Kansas City, and it just didn't work out.
Yeah. No worries.
I just don't like missing it. It's a lot of fun, really good fish, good people to hang out with.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, welcome everybody. Nate, do we have any additions to the agenda this evening?
Mayor and Council, one addition of a slurry seal agreement with the city of Sioux Falls and their subcontractor that I request approval on. We put that under, we could do that under consent agenda item J.
Okay, so slurry seal agreement, under the consent agenda J, any objections to that?
Motion to approve as amended?
Second?
Okay. A motion and a second, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right, motion carries. On to visitors to be heard. If you'd like to come up to the podium, state your name and address. All right. Seeing that there's none, we'll move to the consent agenda. Nate, anything you'd like to draw attention to this evening?
A couple of items on here, Mayor and council members. Two proposals outside of the slurry seal agreement. One for painting the pool, that was a budgeted expense for this year, as well as a proposal from Randstad to get Wi-Fi to both concession stands before the baseball and softball seasons start. That one in particular came in way under budget as far as Randstad is concerned, but we did need to do some wiring, and so that'll probably make up most of that shortfall. So we should be pretty close to what we budgeted. Number of seasonal employees to hire. I believe we're about wrapped up with pool hiring. There may be a couple more out there, but I think we're just about wrapped up. A number of them need to get their certifications in yet, but for the most part we're looking good there. And we have a bunch of recreation assistants and groundskeepers to hire as well. The two resolutions, one is amended schedule of salaries and wages just to reflect all the changes that have been made since last winter, when we had a number of vacant positions or positions turnover, as well as one change. And then amended schedule of fines and fees just to memorialize the negative surcharge that's on utility bills now.
All right, any comments, discussion, questions within council?
How does the Mongan pool painting and sandblasting bid come in for us? I know the number, but what were we expecting?
That's about what we were expecting. We had them quoted last summer because we were looking at potentially doing it yet last year. We're within a couple thousand, if I remember right, from what they had established last summer. Typically, we would go out and look for a number on one like this, but we were very impressed with the work these guys did at the wastewater plant a couple of years ago. So we decided to stick with them.
And the bid is good for spring 2025. Spring goes to June 20th. What's the likelihood of that happening before?
Should start this week, Wednesday.
That's what I wanted to hear.
We were hoping last week, but that didn't happen.
Okay.
Was that also the company we were potentially gonna use to paint the band shell too?
Probably not.
Okay.
We could. They're certainly talented, but I don't think we need that specialized kind of work.
With the slurry seal agreement, is that also in line with past slurry seal projects? Are we similar in the amount?
Similar amount, but way under budget.
Okay.
We had budgeted for a lot more this year to wrap up, because this is the 7th year. Go back a little bit, when I started, we wanted to get on a 7-year schedule for slurry seals. Every street gets sealed every 7 years. This is the last rotation in that 7 years, so we want to wrap up every street that we haven't already gotten to. That still came in well below the budget.
Good. Good to hear.
Any other questions or discussion?
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Okay.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. The roll call. Swear.
Aye.
Mauer.
Aye.
Welch.
Aye.
Doherty.
Aye.
Bowers.
Aye.
Vendrill.
Aye.
All right, motion carries. On to, for old business, we have city council vacancy.
Mayor and council, wanted to keep this on here just in case there's any discussion for you to have up to the point where we're actually going to appoint the Ward 1 vacancy. So I'll just have it on here this meeting next and the first meeting in May, assuming that there may be some discussion, but certainly doesn't need to be.
All right.
On that note, we have had a gentleman step forward and say they would be interested in the appointment. Has anyone had a chance to visit with that individual?
I reached out to him, I haven't connected with him yet.
Yeah, I intend to connect with him as well, I haven't yet. But,
Good.
yeah.
Same.
Sounds good. I didn't have Brittany and Sam, I didn't have you guys on that for obvious reasons.
Yeah. All right, any other discussion?
What would be the timeline for that vacancy?
The vacancy is created as soon as the new council is seated at the May 12th meeting. But the current occupant of the seat serves until the appointment is made, so.
I was just
Timeline
thinking-
is decided really by, right now, the seven of you collectively, but at the May 12th meeting, it would be, one new council member and then a vacant, well, not quite yet a vacant seat in your place.
I guess my question, the reason I'm asking is, would the intent be that the new seated council would have some discussion or ability to discuss the vacancy, or is the intent that this council discuss that vacancy?
Either is fine. I mean, the new council is the council that has to appoint. So, whatever this council and a new council decide, really all they have to do is comply with state law in terms of how they're making it happen.
I mean, I don't wanna speak for Brittany, but I think it'd be best if the remaining and the newly awarded member make that decision, I guess, versus Brittany and I being involved in it.
I agree.
So you're saying at the May 12th meeting or after to make that decision? Yeah. I mean, and again, you can't make the appointment technically until there's a vacancy. The vacancy doesn't exist until
May 12th.
halfway through the May 12th meeting, so.
Sure.
Just because the new council will be serving with that individual and I guess the plan for moving forward and strategic goals, just so that's all aligned, would make more sense, I think, with the newly seated council.
I mean, if you guys wanna ask us questions on them or whatever, that's fine, but I think it's best that you guys make that decision ultimately.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay, we'll move on to 5, new business, agenda item A, US Solar presentation and discussion.
Mayor and Council, we were contacted by US Solar about a potential conditional use permit for a solar farm north of Lennox, outside our boundary but within our planning jurisdiction. So while we don't officially have a say in whether it's issued by Lincoln County Planning Commission, the commission is traditionally given weight when we choose to voice a position on these types of applications. So Luke from US Solar is here tonight. You have a PowerPoint in your packets, and he's going to provide us a brief presentation on what they're proposing.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, guys. Nice to meet you. I'm Luke. I work as a project developer at US Solar, so thank you for having me tonight. Hopefully, let me know if you guys don't have anything in front of you, but I have the same PowerPoint, so I'll just kind of run through it slide by slide really quickly. So US Solar, who are we? We've been around for about a decade now, 2014. I think when people hear US Solar, they're like, oh, it must be some, massive company with thousands of employees, but we're actually a small business, about 80 employees, and we're based in the Twin Cities. So based in the Midwest, we have 85 plus projects that are running already, operational, and as it says here, we try to develop projects that provide utilities with electricity generation that they say that they need, and then we want to be obviously good neighbors, so integrate into the community, as well as help increase the local tax base. So moving on to the location, again, the reason I'm here tonight, just most of my job is keeping people informed of what's going on for our proposed projects, and I've found that people don't really like surprises unless it's money or good news, or stuff like that. So the location of this proposed project, it's to the northwest of the city, just north of 277th Street. The parcel belongs to the Stormo Trust. If the proposed project comes to fruition, it would interconnect to the substation that's located, I think it's Boynton and Elm on the north side, Xcel Energy substation. So it's about 1.7 miles between the proposed site and the substation. So just really quickly, specifications. What is it? It's a 7 megawatt proposed solar facility. So in our business, that's kind of like a mid-sized solar garden. It's not a tiny residential one. It's not one that takes up thousands and hundreds of acres. It's right in the middle. So about 43 acres. And you can kind of see it's small, the rows of modules on that photo there. the modules are north and south, and then the panels track the sun every day, east to west, and then reset at night, do the same thing the next day. So visually, what do these things look like? We do have a website and all of our operational projects. There are photos of most of them on the website, so if you are further curious, you can definitely look on your own time. But page wire fencing, so it's not like a chain link fence with like barbed wire in the top, unless in theory Lincoln County could require that. But we typically try to do egg-style page wire fencing. It's about 6 to 7 feet tall. We have found that just working in largely agricultural communities, that seems to fit better. And then the modules themselves, about 6 to 8 to 9 feet tall, depending on, again, that time of the day. So at 12 noon, they're gonna be flat as a pancake, and then, sometimes at night or in the morning, you're gonna be a little taller. So visually, we do have, right now, we have not submitted anything to the county. Our plan is to have at least one row of screening outside the north, the east, and the south fences. And then additional tree screening. We've been in pretty comprehensive discussion with the northern neighbor, Andrew Nielsen, and there'd be some additional tree screening planted on the northern fence line of the Stormo parcel to kind of mitigate his views from his driveway. Continuing on with the visual characteristics, again, so farm field style fence, there's no lighting, so all of our projects are fully fenced, they have security cameras, they're monitored remotely, but there's no lights proposed. And then what do we do, like under the ground, you can kind of see on a couple of those photos, we plant pollinator friendly habitat. It's about, as high as your knees. The goal with that is just to give the soil a little bit of a break and then provide habitat for local pollinators. And then we have a little gap on the bottom of the fence that allows kind of the idea we have to comply with National Electric Code, so it's got to be, again, 6 to 7 feet tall fence. Have a little gap on the bottom to let small critters in and out without getting trapped. So setbacks, you're looking at about, again, this is subject to modification. We have not yet submitted anything official, but you'd have about 140 feet on the front yard to the east. To the north, pretty significant setback, about 200 plus feet. And then to the south, it's a little smaller, as well as the rear yard would be anywhere from 10 to 20 feet. So the most important thing we did a virtual meeting with the immediate neighbors last year. We held an in-person meeting with the neighbors in January. We met with the township in March, and here we are now in April. The main, I would say, focus, concern, et cetera, would be the stormwater management piece so far. So just to give you guys an idea of kind of what we've talked with the neighbors, again, kind of been the main topic of conversation. Just going through really quickly, any entrance path that we would have coming off the east would have a culvert under it, size for a 10-year storm. We're also willing to maintain that eastern ditch. Perry Township told us that when that eastern ditch, the water flows south, when it's maintained, it tends to drain much better, so we would absolutely be willing to maintain that. There's a undersized northeastern culvert, and we'd be willing to repair or replace that, depending on Andrew Nielsen's opinion. And then, again, I mentioned the pollinator-friendly habitat, so we have the intention to reduce runoff compared to crops, and then we'd have a basin on the south side that would catch water before it goes to the Schaefer property to the south. And then our general goal is just hold more water in that northern portion of the fenced area. So decommissioning, that's what happens after the project. Our lease with the Stormwater Trust requires us to decommission the project at the end of the project's lifespan. Additionally, when we do go to Lincoln County, which I imagine would be later this year, we would propose something within our application that would require a decommissioning again at the end of the project. So some jurisdictions, most of them I would say, require some sort of surety, cash, bond, letter of credit to be set aside, so that if anything were to happen to US Solar, there'd be a pot of money to abandon take out the project. And then almost done here. Construction, people often ask about this, you know, how long does it take, what does it kind of look like? It's actually really simple, so there's steel I-beams drilled into the ground, and then the racking goes on top of the I-beams, and then the solar panels clip onto the racks. So the loud part of construction is that driving of the steel I-beams. Luckily for a, I don't know, smaller to mid-sized project like this, it wouldn't take more than a few business days to drill those I-beams. That is frankly loud. After that, it's pretty simple. And after the construction of the project, it's really just electrical testing. So we work with Xcel Energy, the utility, who gives us official approval to turn it's called permission to operate, turn the project on. So again, I-beam driving, that's the most noticeable part. Construction would be about 10 weeks, and then the testing, and again, we would work obviously during daytime hours. Sound, that's a question that comes up. You should not be able to hear a solar facility if it's operating correctly from outside the fenced area. We have inverters and transformers that do have a very, I would say, a quiet humming noise, but again, you shouldn't notice it unless you're standing right next to it. And then once they're operational solar facilities, they don't really require much maintenance. So you have like 1 or 2 pickup trucks that visit the site every quarter. So usually that's to mow the habitat underneath the modules. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, we got cameras that remotely monitor it. Very little traffic, no odor, and then again, we'll have that significant setback from the eastern road. In addition, you'd have we're proposing tree screening, so there shouldn't be much visual impact. The panels themselves are fully contained. Quickly on the tax revenue, I kind of put approximate, this is again an estimate. And I also put the codified law that discusses this, but long story short, it's broken down to the school district in Lennox. They get 50% of the tax, production revenue. Lincoln County would get 35%, and then 15% goes to the township. Lastly, finishing up, the other benefits would include the upgrades to the local Xcel Energy distribution lines. So from that substation to the site, that's how the electricity, gets to where it needs to go. It's going to be in the ballpark of $1.4 million in upgrades that US Solar would have to fund in order to make the project come to fruition. And then, during construction, you have, I'd say, about 25 temporary full-time jobs. So that's really the basics, and with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
With those full-time jobs, do you mobilize a unit that comes from like the Minneapolis area, or do you create local jobs that are temporary?
Very good question. We have a couple of contractors that I would say, use more than others. So for this, I can't, I guess, it's tough to know at this point in time, preliminary. I guess I don't want to promise anything that can't be delivered right now. US Solar could certainly look into the area. Some of the contractors we've used that I know of is like Noblesdorf is one of them, for example. I would hope they would come from the general area. I can't promise anything at this juncture.
And then for like ongoing operation, it says it's approximately 4 to 8 times a year visits.
Yeah.
Do you mobilize somebody for that, or is that?
Yeah, so, yes, it would be a local company. So
Okay.
typically in Minnesota, that's where most of our projects are. Excuse me, we have a contractor that we typically use called Natural Resource Services, Inc., NRS. But yeah, we have projects we have a couple projects in Colorado, for example. Sometimes we'll get, people calling in the summertime saying, hey, can we get this mowed? And they'll send a subcontractor out there within a week or two to get it.
Okay.
So how did you choose this site, or what's attractive about our community?
Completely reasonable question, right? Like why Lennox? The answer to that question is Xcel Energy. Utilities control a lot of this, and they put out a RFP, or a request for proposal, back in like 2022, late 2022, and this substation, the Lennox substation, was identified as an area that they were wanting to have a solar energy facility. the way it works from there is that US Solar sends out letters essentially to neighbors, and the negotiations kind of started with the Stormwater Trust from there. So that's kind of why it ended up with.
Is there a potential for expansion?
No, good question. Yeah, once it's built, it's built.
What's the current state with the immediate neighbors? Are they all on board or is there objection?
Another good question. I actually just met with a western neighbor, just, 2 hours ago. I think we have made significant progress. Of course, any neighbors can show up. They'll get notified when we actually submit something to Lincoln County. But I think I'm being truthful in stating that we have worked to address their concerns, and I think we've made significant progress, primarily when it comes to the stormwater management.
What are the concerns they brought forward?
Again, primarily stormwater management. You could say a little bit visually, but very flat land. And the concern, I think that the main concern is, this project, impacting the water flow south. And that's where we kind of got in the nitty gritty with the neighbors at the January meeting and Perry Township last month, talking about, doing the things like maintaining that eastern ditch so that water flows south correctly, working with the northern neighbor on a screening plan that would appease him because he has, kind of a front yard view of our proposed project, repairing the culvert. We'd have a, permanent basin to the south to catch the water, those kind of things.
And it's currently zoned ag?
It is currently zoned ag, yep, so that's, I guess, in speaking with Lincoln County Planning and Zoning, sounds like they're pretty busy with other things right now, but they don't actually have a solar energy system ordinance. Developers like us, we like when jurisdictions have ordinances because we like to try to follow the rules, and that's kind of the wrinkle here. So my understanding is the way it would work is a planned, they call it a change of zone request from the ag district to the planned development district, the PDD, and the PDD would have like the conditions for the issuance. So in other words, Lincoln County could say, hey, USO, you gotta do X, Y, and Z as conditions of us issuing this change of zone.
Benefits to the residents of Lennox, outside of the school district, but more in line with the city?
I would say, well, primarily, I guess, would be frankly financial. The financial tax revenue.
School district, county, township,
Yep,
city of Lennox.
got it. Yeah, so it'd be likely, I would say, the infrastructure upgrades, again, it's kind of dictated by the utility in that they've indicated a need and identified this substation, so that's kind of what brought us here.
Excel's not gonna lower their rates for us because you're putting in a solar field.
I wouldn't want to go on the record and say.
I'll call Eric and find out.
Yeah.
What are some risks that you maybe haven't discussed or aren't included in your presentation that we haven't asked about already?
Risks. Well, I guess when I hear risk, first thing I would say is that all of our facilities are fully insured, so just want to put that out there. We have to maintain insurance throughout the lifespan of the project. I think I covered decommissioning. I think that is a subject. I've been doing this for almost 4 years now, and I've seen that. I would say that's kind of like the main concern. What happens if US Solar goes out of business? That is a risk, right? Halfway through the project, is this, county or landowner or whatever going to get stuck with a non-operational project? And so that's kind of where I talked about the decommissioning sureties. Again, it's secure, it's like monitored remotely. So the online system, if anything were to be outside of the parameters, we would obviously see that and send somebody out. Trying to think of any other.
Is there any fire risk or?
We have not had any fire
Malfunction.
issues on any of our projects.
How about
We did-
reflection?
What's that?
Certain times of the day, any reflection?
Glare?
Reflection and glare, yeah. So some jurisdictions will require they call it like an SCAT, I don't even know what it stands for, a glare model, right? Where a third party company has to come in and study what is the impact. So what I would say is these panels, right, are polysilicon. Their goal is to absorb the light and not reflect it. The glass frame on the outside can certainly do that. The reason on this specific project I wouldn't be overly concerned is because we've met with the neighbors and they were like very clear, like, hey, we really don't want to see this thing. I would say that the trees, usually we do something like an eastern red cedar, so that starts at about 6-7 feet, and then it can grow pretty tall, I don't know, 20 feet. So that's a long way of saying, with screening proposed, I wouldn't be overly concerned about glare.
With the company being relatively young at
Yep.
2014, I can't imagine you've decommissioned any projects yet.
That's very truthful, yes. We are, I would say, I think our first one went online in like 2017. I started working here in 2021, so yeah, I've seen a lot of things, and one thing I have not seen is a project and nearing the end of its lifespan. Most projects, I would say, have a lifespan of like 25 to 40 years, generally speaking. So that's probably what I would say is an estimate for this project, should it come to fruition.
What do you do for upgrades when technology changes? Do you come and retool it?
That's a really good question. No is the answer to that question. Again, if something's falling outside of the parameters where it's like, oh, this row of modules, solar panels is
It's repaired.
not collecting energy, not,
Right.
harnessing the sun, well then we would send somebody out there to make sure it's repaired. But I guess an easy way that I would describe this is back in 2021 when I started, we were using like 380 watt modules, and now technology has improved over the last 3.5 years where we're up to like 580 watt modules, meaning that the modules are able to be more efficient, so you in theory need less room. So technology does improve, but once the project is constructed, it's with those materials, those panels, those inverters, etc. So there's no upgrading.
Same with the battery storage, like,
So yes, but there's no battery storage for this. No proposed batteries for
okay,
this.
so everything's gonna go straight into.
I think you asked about fire risk, and I think that's primarily when we have a battery component. As somebody who has done this for projects with the battery component, I think that's where that topic is like very relevant. And this would just be photovoltaic solar panels.
Do you guys have any other farms like this in South Dakota, or would this be your first one in South
No, this would be the first one. So from what I gathered is that just in working with Xcel Energy the last 2 years on this project is that they don't have a ton of proposed solar projects, generally speaking, in the state. Maybe I'm wrong with that, but this would be our first one in South Dakota. We've gone through the study process of Xcel Energy studying the project. That's where I came with that $1.4 million estimate. Xcel Energy provided that to us, saying, hey, US Solar, if this project goes through, that's how much the company can expect to have to pay for the upgrades from that substation to the project. So really what would need to happen for the project to become a reality is we would have to come to some sort of financial arrangement with Xcel. In other words, like a power purchase agreement where Xcel has to purchase the electricity produced. That has yet to be done, and then obviously you need a use permit from Lincoln County. We haven't started that process yet.
So this facility stays under your ownership, you just have an agreement with Xcel to sell the energy to them?
That is exactly how it would work, yes. It would be an LLC under the US Solar umbrella, and yes, we would have an interconnection agreement. Like I said, we finished the process of interconnection. They gave us the cost estimate, so before construction, we would have to pay a majority of that pretty large fee, and then we would also have to come to some sort of financial arrangement.
Does the South Dakota Public Utilities Commission have oversight over projects like this?
No, I should know this for South Dakota. So at least in Minnesota, the threshold is 50 megawatts, excuse me. So anything under 50 in the state of Minnesota would have to be at the local jurisdiction. If it's over 50, it would go to the PUC. I don't know what the threshold is for South Dakota. But this one, just being, 7 megawatts, it would be, again, at the Lincoln County jurisdiction.
So you said there wouldn't really be any expansion here, but if Excel Energy determines this is a good partnership, do you foresee they would request expansion maybe in other counties?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, Excel Energy could put out like future requests for proposals. They do that all the time, and I think a lot of it is state mandated. So like, I don't know if South Dakota has any like requirements. I know in Minnesota, I think it's like a 2040. They have to have a certain percentage be produced by wind or renewable energy, solar. So some of it can come from government requirements where the utility's like, oh, we gotta meet this, therefore we gotta hit up solar developers. Yes, they very well could. From what I gathered so far is that Excel doesn't have a lot of solar specific resources in South Dakota at this time.
Any other questions for Luke? So,
If there's additional questions, I can leave my business card and you have my contact. I really obviously appreciate your guys' time. And I think, just so everybody's aware, for a timeline perspective, again, we've kind of worked with the immediate neighbors. We've gone to the township. Tonight, seeing you guys, I think we would probably, if we were to submit something to the county level, it would probably be within the next, 3 to 6 months, give or take. That should be the next step, so.
all right. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. We don't have any action item or recommendation on this, then there's just information and concern, okay.
Nate, with our comprehensive plan, I don't recall us having much consideration of that specific plot of land.
No, if I remember right, it was unspecified. We really paid a lot of attention to those areas that are right along the highway.
Right.
For commercial and then some specific industrial. Outside of that, we left the slate sort of blank in terms of what could fill out in those areas. So.
Right. Just confirming, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, on to B, we have canvas of 2025 city council election.
Mayor and council members, this item is really final, well, maybe second to last step. There's one more step that comes after this in administering the 2025 municipal election. So canvassing the election is simply the act of certifying the results and declaring the winner in an election. It requires a review of the results by the city council. In this case, it's very simple, a 37 to 32 vote. If there is a question of wanting to count those again or for the council to see the ballots, we can do that, but pretty clear winner in this case. So there's a specific form to complete, and that's with Alderman Mauer at this point. So if there are no questions, I would recommend the motion to declare the winner of the City Lennox Ward 3 2025 election to be Laura Teasy.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, to declare the winner of the city Lennox Ward 3 2025 election to Laura Teason, is that how you say it?
Teasy.
Teasy, okay. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right, motion carries.
As the winner of that election, the incoming Alderman Teasy has been the recipient of a grand prize of a big giant binder of information. She can also feel free to reach out at any time, I think, to any of us with any questions. So.
Yeah, congratulations again, Laura.
Yeah, welcome. I've sent you my contact information, and I'm sincere when I say reach out with questions, feel free.
I did mention it earlier, if I didn't respond to you, I was down with the flu
It's all right,
shortly after the election.
I took it personally.
All right, on to C, housing study.
Mayor Council, we budgeted a $10,000 for an update to our housing study this year. Most recent study was completed in 2019. Since that time, obviously, a lot has changed here in terms of housing, as well as to the regional market. So we try and do this every 5 years. We did not do it last year. I think we're really due for one this point. So there's two routes we can go here. What we did before is we used South Dakota Housing Authority, Housing Needs Study Program. That gave us a grant on a project, and so that's what we used last time. The second route is to use a private consultant, in this case, Porchlight. The consultant partners with Sioux Metro Growth Alliance to provide a more detailed and customized study at $12,000 at a lower cost than is available to those who are not a member of SMGA. That would be my preferred route. I think the 19 city was sufficient for our needs, but it provided very little Lennox specific information. A lot of it was just pulled from old stuff. Maybe what was used in Centerville or Faith or Lemon, and just retooled for us. So the cost is less, but again, just like with our comprehensive plan, you get what you pay for. So it's sufficient, but it's not really specific to our needs. So Porchlight offers a more customized report that's more specific to our community. Mid-American has offered to help with the cost of the housing study, but I've not heard back on the extent to which they will assist. Burke with Porchlight is here tonight if you have any questions. I did include a recent housing study they completed for Santee Sioux Nation. It's very detailed, a lot of great information there. I think ours would be fairly similar to something like this, but Burke can speak more to that.
Yeah, my name is Bert Hermantraut. I'm the Director of Policy and Communities at Porchlight. We are based out of Sioux Falls, but I graduated from high school just not too far away in Beresford, so I know this part of the state well. Happy to answer any questions you may. Or I can talk about it. You want me to do that? Whatever you'd like.
You said you're Bert?
Burke, B-E-R-K.
Burke.
So like Birch, but weirder.
Bert from Beersford.
Yep.
So what, like the other study that Nate mentioned that is grant partially funded, like what more do we get with your proposal?
You bet. So what we like to do at Porchlight is we like to make sure we're looking at the data and we're also looking at what's really happening in the community. And so the data is really important. We look at demographic information, economic analysis, figure out what the numbers say. But particularly in rural communities, we know that numbers don't always tell the whole story. And so we have in-depth conversations with folks in the community. I think in this project we have 10 stakeholder interviews, and that can be with one person, or that can be 50 people at one time that we're having a conversation with. We had 10 of those conversations. And then we kind of marry those together so that we're looking at the data, we're looking at what we're hearing from folks in the community, and that allows us to give really good information. The other thing that we do is we work closely with the steering committee throughout the process. So as you're getting ready to sign the contract, we have you put together a steering committee of, we typically say 5 to 7 folks. A lot of times people want more, but we say 5 to 7 is good because if it's more, it just gets bogged down. If it's less, sometimes there's not that mutual accountability. But what those folks do is they give us good on-the-ground knowledge of what's happening. They can be our advocates in the community to help us talk to someone who we really need to talk to, and can just provide good information about who we should be talking to and just the local, what's happening locally. And so that's kind of the other piece, is that we work closely with folks in the community to go through the process and figure out exactly what it is that you need to know. So if you have a specific question you want an answer to, we'll make sure that's in there. Whereas, as Nate was kind of talking about, a lot of the other studies, it's kind of, they've got a template and they stick to the template and you get that data out, which can be fine in some circumstances, but I know for a community like Lennox, there's a lot changing, a lot happening, and so it's helpful to be able to say, we've got a specific question we need an answer to, get us that answer, right? And that's something that we try to do. So, for example, we've worked with our kind of sibling company, PASC, on a housing study for Hartford. We're working on one for Lamar's, Iowa right now, and the one that we attached here was with the Santee Sioux Nation down in Nebraska. They have very unique circumstances around theirs. You're not really able to have home ownership there, and so we spent a lot of time in the community figuring out what are the specific things you need to know. And the other piece of that is, what does someone who's trying to provide a grant to the Santee Sioux Nation need to know about this community that they might not understand from the outside? Providing that context so that they were able to apply for grants and get funding for projects. So those are some of the things that we try to bring to a project like this.
What do those conversations look like? And how long, I imagine you ask a lot of the questions and they just answer and?
You bet. Yeah, I mean, they're fairly collaborative. Usually, we look for each conversation to be, we target for them to be 45 minutes. Often they go up to an hour, and we block out time for an hour. And so if it's a one-on-one conversation, those are very candid conversations usually. So the way we typically operate is we say, you know, what you tell us will be included in the report, but we're not going to attribute it specifically to you, so that we can get honest feedback from folks about what's going on, and incorporate it into, then we summarize it all anonymously so that we can incorporate it. And then, you know, if there's something like public feedback session you want to do where you have lots of folks and whoever wants to weigh in can, you can do that, or choose not to do that. But that would be, again, a 1 hour time where we'll collect all that information. So it's usually, yeah, we ask questions, let people talk as much as they want, and then we record it, and take notes on it, and then summarize it at the end. So there's a good record, and we can kind of turn those formal to informal conversations into real data that we can use in the report qualitatively.
How do you determine your steering committee?
Absolutely. That's something that we ask whoever's, it's in our contract. We basically say, hey, in our contract, list out who these 5 to 7 people should be. And basically, so it's it would be up to you, basically, who that steering committee is. We encourage that, you know, it's folks who are well connected in the community, know what's going on, and are going to represent you well in the process. So it could be, you know, whoever you choose, basically.
So when you do an analysis of a community like Lennox, do you take into consideration like where we are geographically compared to a fairly large hub and jobs there, the average income of a house here, or
Yep.
a home and a family here versus in Sioux Falls, and those pieces, what our groceries cost?
Absolutely, absolutely. So what we do, I mean, we actually, Hartford's a little closer than Sioux Falls than you, but we were really looking at that with Hartford is, okay, looking at population dynamics here, but also how that's impacted by Sioux Falls growth and how that's affecting everything. But we look, so we do a few things. We do a population analysis where we basically look at 10 years ago, now, and 10 years in the future, and try to figure out what is your population going to look like, particularly with different ages. So we say, you know, how many people were 10 years old 10 years ago, now they're 20 years old, how does that, and then use that to map out what your future age demographics are going to look like. We look at income, we look at the value of homes in the community, and then we basically match up, you know, they typically say you want to spend 30% or less of your income on housing. Many people spend more than that, but we basically model out, okay, what are people spending on housing versus how much are they actually paying for housing? And that helps us look at the local dynamics of the community and figure out where are there gaps in your housing market on the rental side or an ownership side, and kind of fit all those pieces together. So yes, it's very localized. And then we sometimes adapt based on what's happening in the community. If we're hearing about, you know, we're really having trouble with low-income renters or whatever it is to get them housing, we try to key in on that and make sure we understand not only that it is telling us, hey, it's a problem, but why and what are some possible solutions.
And when you're looking at what somebody's spending on a property versus renting, do you look at what maybe our tax rate is here, property taxes versus other communities?
Yep. So there's kind of two numbers on the owner-occupied side. There's what your mortgage is, and then there's property tax, insurance. Those are kind of three: is the mortgage, property tax, and the insurance that comes with that. Kind of like when you have a conversation with the bank about a mortgage, and we break it out by both, but we typically look at all three of those combined because there are more costs associated with home ownership. And then we also model out, because often what you're trying to figure out is what this is going to look like for a new home buyer. So we try to take a look at, you know, what is this going to mean if someone's trying to take out a mortgage right now, whether they're a first-time home buyer or, you know, buying their second home. What are kind of the homes that would be affordable, which of course shifts with interest rates, but we try to factor all that in.
This might be a question more for Nate, but I imagine the output from this study would be primarily used by the development corporation, correct?
They would certainly be using it. I mean, it's, you know, the way we typically would use it, obviously, we're going to work with the development corporation who's already working with some multifamily that we know we need. This would further enhance those projects and having the data that they need. But more importantly, it helps those developers that we may be talking to. It tells them, you know, here's what the community can support, both in number of multifamily units and price point of multifamily units. So, Development Corp would certainly be a beneficiary of it, as would developers. We would use it for grant applications, so on and so forth.
I'm just wondering if maybe it deserves a conversation with LABC, a partnership. Or if you've had that
I'm
conversation.
not.
Are you anticipating all the data to come from our residents, or is that stuff that's already out there that you can access?
Yeah, so it's a combination. Most of the data we look at is publicly available through US Census data. And then we try and adapt based on that. And then usually we talk to the city about like building permits and those type of things. And then supplement it with conversations with folks.
Yep.
So that's kind of how.
Yeah, I just don't think, we sent a survey out, I don't
Right.
get a lot of response.
Yeah, no. And that's why we kind of take this approach, is a lot of times you do a survey about housing and people care about housing, but then they start filling out a survey. I don't want to do a survey, so we try and make sure, have conversations when we're figuring out who those stakeholder interviews are going to be, that we capture the folks we need to capture, but really, you really try to get precise about who that is, as opposed to general survey, maybe some people respond, you're struggling to get responses. So.
What's the timeline take for that?
10 weeks. So we'll kick right off with the steering committee, and this is a community that we can. One of the things that's kind of time intensive is the stakeholder interviews, and then we do a visual inspection of the community. But for a project of this size, we can get that done pretty quick. I say we, it's mainly me sitting there doing everything. But we basically balance these projects so that we can get it done pretty quick for you. So we'd be, we need to figure out what the start date is, but basically we kick off that first week, and 10 weeks later, you've got a report. So.
Are the one-on-ones done over the phone, or are they actually in-person conversations?
We would probably do them in person here. Usually the way we do it is we say, we're going to be in town for 1 or 2 days, and we'll do it in person, and then if someone can't make any of those times work, we jump in a Zoom and do it. For Lennox, it takes 20 minutes for me to get here, so I'd probably just run that down, depending on what someone wants to do. So.
Sure.
And you said we could have multiple people involved in one interview.
Yep, exactly. So, for example, in Lamar's, we were just doing interviews, and they said, hey, let's get all the multifamily builders together and have a conversation, and we did that. Sometimes it's nice to have people in separate conversations, and you can do that too, but we had 10 interviews in Lamar's, and we had, I probably talked to 20 people.
Sure.
What do you think you're gonna see with a housing study in Lennox?
That's a good question. I don't know what we will see. I think you'll see that you need more housing. That's usually what we see.
That's kind of a slam dunk, I mean.
Right.
I don't need 12 grand to tell me that.
Yeah. But, if I could tell you before we wrote the study, I wouldn't encourage you to do the study, would be my answer. But, often we see that a lot of what we actually see in communities is that communities are surprised by is the amount that, particularly in the rental market, of downward pressure you're experiencing, where, a lot of times folks on the lower end of the income spectrum are having trouble affording rent. But part of that is that folks with higher incomes are taking up units that those folks could be using. And so sometimes communities see, actually we need a few more higher end apartments that folks are willing to pay a little bit more for to open up the rest of the housing stock. I don't know if that will be the case in Lennox. I haven't looked at any of the data yet, but that's something we sometimes see.
I think the market kind of finds that answer. And if there's builders that see the need that they can build it and make good money on that, they'll do it.
Right.
So is this kind of like a put you over the hump type deal that says, here's what our study tells you, Mr. Developer, this is what we need, or does the market not find it if there's a great opportunity?
Typically, the way I think about it is this is how the developers find it. Is usually developers are like, oh, it's great to know that this is kind of what people are paying and what people are looking to pay. So it's an information finding opportunity for them. So how you all choose to use it, I don't know, but usually developers like to look at this because it's got the data that they want to understand how they should be pricing the units.
Yeah, it's a shortcut for them. They don't have to do their own study.
Right.
Yeah.
For the rental side of things,
Yeah.
And the way we try and write these reports is that anyone who's looking at it can be useful for. So, the first page is a summary. If you quit reading after the first page, you've got the information. Then we dive into a little bit deeper, all the way down to the appendix that only nerds like me read. So whatever level of information you need, you've got it. And so if someone in the community just wants to understand like, oh, what's the housing in Lennox, they can read one page and have a basic sense of it. But for the developers who want to understand, okay, at this income bracket, what can people afford and how much demand is there for it, they can also use that, or something like if you're applying for a grant or something, all those things kind of work together.
How often do you feel that these studies need to be updated?
So it's a 10-year time window. We don't encourage, usually for studies like this, we don't encourage waiting all 10 years because things change in the meantime. But we usually encourage every 3 years. That's good.
So you said you'll be using census data, I guess what was the most recent census?
20.
Yeah, so we look at the American Community Survey, which is updated annually. So,
Okay.
Any other questions for Bert? All right.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank
Good to
you.
talk to you.
Thank you.
Any discussion within council?
I wasn't on the council when we did this in 2019, so it'd be my first go around. And I'd love to hear, the real benefits from our perspective as a city. I know the benefits that Bert laid out for us, that sounds reasonable. But what are we looking to get?
Yeah, we have used it. Now, it might make more sense for me to go back and look over the past 5-6 years, specific things that we used it for, who we shared it with, those kinds of discussions. It is an economic development tool for us. It gives us the information we need to make certain cases. If LADC is working on a multifamily project, we know what we need. It's not a guessing game. We don't have 5 different proposals that meet different needs. We've got specific parameters that we're looking to fill. We have used it to support grant projects. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but we have used it to support the documentation for some of those as well.
Brittany brought up a great point with LADC really needing something like this. Why is it something that they don't handle?
I don't know that it's a discussion we've ever had. I think in most cases, the city typically goes after that because most of them are working through CCOG. And, development corporations aren't necessarily members of CCOG, the cities are.
Sure.
I was thinking that maybe the LADC is part of the panel or the steering committee.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Can you talk more about like what specific data you need for grants? That I just want to make sure that the ROI makes sense. I know it's something that's needed for grant proposals and writing, but you can go like to. I'm not saying that you have time for this, but is it just 3 pieces of information we can pull ourselves from the census website, or is it when we're writing proposals? Is it worth our time and effort for that 12,000?
Instead of just pulling the census data.
And how much
Yeah, I'd like to look back and see, what grants we've gone after that this would have been useful for, that information is useful for, before answering that off the top of my head.
How much of this is already maybe given to us through CCOG?
None of it is,
I mean, not directly our city, but obviously, but they would have trends and different things like that.
They don't monitor it for us or for any of the local communities, and that's the whole purpose of that. SBHA grant through CCOG.
I mean, if we don't get it done every year, and we're paying 12,000 for it this year, it's really 3 years from now, we do it again, it's $4,000 a year if you look at it that way. I mean, I know it comes out of this year's budget, but.
Yeah.
And 3 years is probably, the dream timeline for porch light. I don't know that that's. Just saying. That could be 6 years and it's $2,000.
I think that's a fair point. I mean, had we not done Countryside in 2020, would we be doing an updated housing study right now?
Well, a lot
Maybe.
has changed
Probably not.
since
Right.
2019 for
Right.
families, economic turns, and employment and all those pieces has changed a lot since 2019.
I'd like to see where the past study was used, like you'd mentioned, you'd do a little digging on that.
Yep.
But there's a lot of logic in doing this. You know, Brittany, you're absolutely right. Everything's changed in the last 6 years. We've seen a crazy swing in all things housing.
On the
And
last
we-
couple months too.
Oh, for sure. Just hoping that it calms down. So with this, this housing study, we would expect to find that we need more housing, obviously.
It's about what kind of housing,
Right.
right?
And then-
In 2019, we needed everything.
Right.
You know, the market was completely tied up. You know, I told a lot of people when I moved here, I think there were 2 houses on the market. That is not ideal. Now we've got a number of houses on the market in multiple price ranges, that's a healthy housing, situation. But I would bet that very little has changed in terms of the availability of rental housing.
Correct.
But a lot has changed in the rental market. But I don't know enough about that to say how.
Well, I feel like Bert hit the nail on the head when he said there's probably people occupying apartments that are lower income that could afford a higher end apartment. Because I look at what's available in Lennox and we don't really have a higher end apartment. We have townhouses, but not really that high end apartment.
And that was, you know, that was something we were trying to induce with Countryside, was more turnover in the regular stock housing. And treat that as more as a step up. It's certainly not necessarily the first time home buyer market up in Countryside, but more meant to be step up in a lot of cases. What that was meant to do was to open up the existing stock for folks that were looking for a first time home, but needed it to be in that lower area price range.
And the housing market exploded.
And then the house market exploded.
So we need a little bit more information before we want to move forward with this, is what I'm
That makes
gathering.
sense.
Okay.
How detrimental is a little 2-week delay on this?
Not at all.
Good.
I'll look for a motion to table this.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second to table, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay. Motion is tabled till next meeting. Let's see here, we are on the D, under new business, the 2023 audit.
Mayor and council, the audit is done, finally. We sat down with, the mayor, finance officer, and I sat down with our auditors last week and reviewed the results. Again, one finding was published for lack of segregation of duties. Again, that's not something that I expect to change, but there is a method out there that, one, there's a number of school districts are using that I'd like to look at, so I'm waiting to get some information. That's from another audit firm, but if we can get that taken care of, I'd be very happy. There were several other deficiencies noted. We'll work to resolve most of those items in the coming year. There is one that we are quite certain we are not going to resolve, and that is issuing handwritten duplicate receipts to every revenue source. We are going to be seeking a change in state law on that matter. So, I think it's easy to tackle. It's, you know, legislature tackled chapter 9, sections 1 through 12, I think, this year, and we can tackle the next section next year, and hopefully we can include something like this. It's meant for an accounting system that was perhaps done with a ledger back in the olden days, and not something that was done with a modern accounting software. So,
Would that essentially mean anytime somebody pays their water bill, you have to write a receipt?
anytime any revenue comes in whatsoever. And we have an online receipt management system with our software. It's all documented in there. If somebody wants a receipt, we can issue it, but this is a requirement to issue it no matter what.
Don't we get some type of, you paid your bill, thank you for your payment, does that not suffice as a receipt?
Yeah, that's not even our concern as utility bills. That's fairly simple because you get that email. If somebody comes in here, I always do a receipt if they're paying. Although I told Tyson my greatest fear in life is that somebody's going to come to the office when I'm the only one here and want to pay by credit card, because I have no idea how to do it. But beyond that.
Yeah, now everybody knows your greatest fear.
Everyone's gonna come in early in the morning to pay their utility bill. Beyond that, I mean, it's things like, oh, we got our biannual property tax payment from Lincoln County, better issue than we received. We got 8 payments from the state of South Dakota this month, better issue or receipt. No, I don't even know who we send it to, you know, so it's just silly.
This was a different auditor this year? No,
Same auditor.
This is the same one. Why is this a new concern?
I think auditors tend to find
They look at different
new
areas.
things and find, I mean, you can't pay attention to every single requirement of state code every year. So there may be sections that they'll pay more attention to this year than others. And I don't know, Tyson, if that's something you can comment on, having been through a few of these on the other side of the desk, but not every finding or comment will be made every year.
So this was in 2023. When did Jen move to, I'm just thinking about segregation of duties, and it talks about the size of the entity, a lack of segregation of duties existed for revenue function. It says that the finance officer processes, basically does everything for financial, but that's not true.
That is not, no. But they are responsible for oversight of all of it, and that's part of the challenge.
So is the concern that without the segregation of duties, if there is something negative that we're going on, there wouldn't be that checks and balances? Because
Correct.
we have that with,
We have it to the extent that we can have it. I would say we're ahead of most municipalities our size. But until we get to, the only communities in South Dakota I would expect to not find this would be Sioux Falls, Rapid City, Aberdeen, maybe Brookings. Outside of that, I think everybody else is probably getting it.
I like the call out to inventory and monetize our inventory of parts with the wastewater treatment facility, especially in light of our efforts to bring in more.
Stock on hand.
You got it. So we eliminate the 30-week downtime. Yeah,
For sure.
that's
A lot of
pretty
that
critical
was
we get that system set.
for water fittings and things like that we have at the street shop too, that it's all been there as long as I can remember, but I don't know that it's specifically been inventoried by age, type of structure, type of fitting, those kinds of things, so.
Sure.
Alright. Any other questions, comments?
I think this was also submitted to Department of Legislative Audit with no comments back.
Otherwise, I'll look for a motion to approve the 2023 audit report.
So
Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. And motion carries. On to E, alternative HR proposal.
Mayor and Council, this is something that's coming back at a couple members' request. A couple of years ago, we discussed the possibility of an HR consultant similar to that used by other communities that have a number of employees but not enough to justify a full-time HR position. So that need really hasn't changed. And we reached out to Alternative HR again, with whom we worked in the past for a couple of quotes on the services we would get. Those services range from a full-time dedicated consultant employee at several $1,000s a month, which we certainly do not need, to kind of a hybrid, to more of the on-demand services, and that's what we've got here, $100 a month, additional hours billed at $155. We do still have access to the HR practices hotline through the municipal league, but it is different. We have used that a few times. I think, Tyson, I think you reached out to it for Kirsty a couple weeks back. A couple items we had with having to do with seasonal employees. But that's really coming from an employment law perspective and not necessarily wage and hour compliance and those kinds of things. The compensation study is one thing that I think we really need to hand off to a consultant this year. I've done it probably done it 4 or 5 years now. It was probably sufficient the first couple of years, but since then I just think we've gotten more complex. I think there's a lot better information out there that I don't have access to that an HR consultant this size does. So, that's probably gonna run us about $6,000 if we were to have them do that this year.
It's definitely overdue.
To outsource that. Yeah. I would.
Would the compensation study also help us evaluate our current matrix that we use for reviews? Could we encompass
Yes.
that in there?
Yes, I think that needs to be a part of this conversation no matter what. That's something that's going to happen this year regardless. When it comes to merit pay, performance evaluations, this consultant is definitely going to be a part of that process. Which, again, will probably cost us a little bit over that 1 hour that we get a month. But and I think you share this, I'd like to get to a point where we don't have to deal with this every year.
Agreed.
So I know we had discussed this in the past, and I absolutely agree, we have a need here for, I wish we could have a full-time HR person, but, it's not really feasible with a town our size. Can you explain how, at that time, we agreed on the emergency call service? And how, is that correct? You can call in and get assistance when needed?
No, we had proposed that, and we decided to stick with just the HR crisis hotline through the municipal.
And so is that essentially the same as number one, the emergency
It's similar.
on demand? Okay.
It's similar, you know, the HR on demand would help more in a situation of here's what's happening with a specific employee. Here's what I'd like to do. Number one, what I'd like to do legal. Number two, is this an effective approach for what we're trying to achieve? Maybe it's a performance issue, maybe it's a compensation issue, maybe, you know, whatever it might be. The HR practices hotline is more of a, here's what the National Labor Relations Board says you have to do, or, you know, the labor laws themselves say you have to do to stay in compliance.
I'll make a motion to accept the proposal with alternative HR.
Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second to accept the motion, or accept the proposal with alternate HR. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, and motion carries. There's no more items. I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Sorry,
Didn't we have?
that was in the consent.
That was a
Sorry.
It's okay. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned.